at mga biktima ng red tagging, pati na rin sa panahon natin ngayon.
Thank you, Elaine. Moving forward to introducing our guests, we will have an interview with Mr. Boni Ilagan, a multi-awarded screenwriter, filmmaker, journalist, and martial law activist. In this episode, he will tell us his own personal experiences of being red tagged or being accused of rebellion during the martial law era.
Yan. Now, for the post-EDSA representative naman, or activists from the post-EDSA era, we have Lean Porquia. Lean is the former spokesperson ng bagong alyansang makabayan or Bayan Panay at the age of 21, no? And he was also the regional chairperson of the League of Filipino Students Panay and also the former regional coordinator ng Kabataan Party List. He is currently the executive consultant of the BPO Industry Employees Network or BIEN Philippines and is currently also one of the co-conveners of the Citizens Rights Watch Network. So this project, the No Holds Barred, is in partnership with CRWN or Citizens Rights Watch Network as well. So yun. Ready na ba kayo sa Lean tsaka Sir Boni?
Magandang gabi. Salamat sa pag-imbita.
Magandang gabi rin and thank you Josh, Elaine, Francine for this opportunity.
And so let's begin, no? So maybe we can start with a very very simple question. What is your personal experience with red tagging in the 1970s naman and post-EDSA era? Let's start with Sir Boni. Ano po, just a few anecdotes po siguro on red tagging during the martial era.
Yeah, noong 1970s, meron ng red tagging pero hindi red tagging ang tawag. Ang tawag ay witch hunting. In concrete terms, ang tawag sa amin ay leftist extremists o kaya ay leftist provocateurs. Kami ay associated sa mga mahihilig daw sa karahasan. Nagpatuloy ang ganoong pagle-label sa amin at it escalated into harassment, physical harassment, and eventually surveillance. So that was 1970. By 1971, August of 1971, Marcos suspended the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus. Even before that, we learned that the military was keeping a blacklist, a so-called blacklist, na ang listahan ito ng mga leaders and prominent members ng lahat ng militant activist organizations. So in that sense, doon nangyari ang witch hunting. Na-curious ako, sabi ko bakit witch hunting? Nag-research ako ng konti at na-trace ko yung witch hunting sa Salem, yung witch hunting sa Salem, Massachusetts noong 1600s na maraming inakusahan ng witchcraft falsely at kung hindi man binilanggo ay binitay. Pero mas malapit sa history, noong 1950s, we learned that in the US, mayroong tinatawag na McCarthyist campaign. Witch hunt din yan sa Amerika. McCarthy happened to be Senator Joseph McCarthy na naglunsad ng isang malawakang kampanya to ferret out alleged communists na naka-infiltrate sa US government and the various institutions. By late 1950s at 1961, sa Pilipinas, nangyari na yung ganong klase ng McCarthyist witch hunt. At pinamunuan ito sa House of Representatives ng isang congressman, ang pangalan ay Leonardo Perez. Nagtawag siya ng mga hearings, congressional hearings, and in particular, the hearings targeted professors and students of the University of the Philippines. So all throughout ng mga panahon na yan, yun yung McCarthyist witch hunt na dinanas namin. Now, going back to the suspension of the privilege, dahil nga may blacklist, marami sa amin nag-decide to leave school and home altogether and join the formative underground resistance movement against the creeping dictatorship of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. Ayun, siguro ang maiksi kong maibabahagi.
Yun po, kayo naman, Lean, sa bagong ano natin ngayon, sa panibagong era, no, sa more modern, more recent era, what's your experience sa red tagging?
Well, when we speak of red tagging sa ngayon, no, it's it's not any different from what Boni explained earlier. Pero what's peculiar about red tagging nowadays, it's because it's openly talked with the technology that we have right now, social media, easier access to information. Mas madalas na pag-uusapan yung red tagging. And to some extent, the concept of red tagging slightly changed, I would say. Kasi before, it's a direct witch hunting to the extent na may came from the McCarthyist concept ng communist hunting, communist tagging. Today, you don't have to be a communist per se, or you don't even have to believe in communism to be red tagged. Right now, the concept of red tagging, it all boils down to, as long as you are against the incumbent government, incumbent president, the policies of the state or the government, then easily the state or the government can red tag you. And critical to this, Josh, na merong component ng state actor. You need to be part of the government or the state to be accused of red tagging per se, because right now the effect or the consequences of someone who is being red tagged is they are being surveyed, or the worst scenario is they will be killed, or they will be illegally arrested. Yun yung consequences of red tagging. As someone who has been red tagged in different occasions by state forces, particularly by the National Task Force to End Local Communist and Armed Conflict, meron siyang chilling effect. And I think that feeling or that effect is no different from what Boni described earlier on how they felt during the martial law years ng witch hunting from the government of Marcos Sr.
Okay, salamat po. This follow-up question is intended for Sir Boni. Kagaya po ng na-share ni Sir Lian, kung ano po yung mga differences ng red tagging noon at ngayon. Kayo po ba, may napansin po ba kayo kung ano po yung pinagkaiba? Let's say, dati po witch hunting, then ngayon po red tagging. Ano po yung pinagkaiba nun, sir?
Pareho lang, essentially. The similarities of red tagging then and now are uncanny, mainly because the state policy, at kahit na i-deny ng gobyerno na hindi state policy, stems from the same aim of it all, and that is to demonize government critics and dissenters by publicly assaulting them with false, hearsay, and unfounded accusations, and by blurring distinctions between these dissenters and the armed rebels. Hindi naman sikreto na mayroong raging civil war sa ating lipunan ngayon, and it has been going on for years with enough reason. Ngayon, itong red tagging ngayon, talagang kinukonekta na nila wala nang distinction. Ang sabi nga ni Palparan, yun daw mga aktivistang nagrarally ay mga NPA na walang baril. Alam niyo yon? So ano na, hinalong kalamay na yan. Of course, the pretext then and now ay safeguarding the welfare of the public and ensuring peace and order. Ngayon, may sense of deja vu sa akin eh. Kasi naranasan ko yon nung 70s. Naranasan ko rin ulit ngayon. Kaya hindi ko alam kung alin ang mas grabe. I have a feeling na ngayon, kasi dahil nga sa technology, binanggit ni Lian ang bilis kumalat sa social media. Noon, walang social media. So, mababasa mo lang sa dyaryo, maririnig mo sa radyo, papapanood sa telebisyon, at sa usap-usapan. Ngayon, in an instant, wow, talagang kakalat. Yung pagtotroll, halimbawa, ng NTF-ELCAC ay napakatindi. Kaya yung chilling effect na binanggit ni Lian, I don't know, baka mas mas matindi ngayon dahil parang any moment nandyan yung panganib.
Tama po, Sir Boni, kasi, like, social media is so powerful na parang anything can be traced in just a moment. Parang may malalaman ka na background and then everything can be fabricated against you. So, yeah, it really is scary to be red tag, no? So, in relation with that, how did being red tag impact your personal lives po? And is there any advice na you can offer to someone if, like, parang, for example, they just recently got red tag?
Ako muna o si Lian? Senior citizen first?
Sige. We can go with Lian muna, no? Since kakasalita lang ni Sir Boni, baka mapahawas na siya.
Sige, I guess the question is, how can someone cope with the concept or the phenomenon of being red tag, or what are you going to do if you're being red tagged? Alam mo, Francine, the problem we have now is that red tagging, if we're gonna look at it plainly, no, wala pang batas. There's no law covering red tagging, iba na lang if it borders a libel or yung harassment per se, which sa totoo lang lahat ng red tagging na ginagawa ng NTF-ELCAC, ng elements ng Philippine Army or even the police are bound by or is covered, no, by laws about harassment, etc. Pero yung red tagging itself, wala pang batas that would criminalize the act of red tagging someone. We wanted to push this as a legislation. We support any legislative actions that would criminalize red tagging. However, sa ngayon habang wala pa yan, what can we do? Number one is to fight red tagging itself. Part of that is exposure sa lahat ng mga red taggers, lalo na sa NTF-ELCAC, and educate the people, tell the people, lalo na yung mga nakakarinig about sa mga biktima nitong red tagging, that what they're doing, the concept of red tagging itself is wrong. Sabi nga ni Boni kanina, there's no more distinction whether you're armed or unarmed. As long as you are being red tagged by the government, your life is already threatened. So we want to put a stop to red tagging. So number one, if there's already a direct threat to your life, immediately report it to the authorities. Pero yun yung tanong namin lagi kanino kami magre-report? Police na yung nagre-red sa amin. So sa police rin ba kami magre-report? So that's the dilemma that we have right now. But nonetheless, very importantly, document everything that happened. If there's any threat, document it so that any documentation or any means that you can document it can be used later on to file cases against that person or against that organization or institution. That's very critical. No? And pangalawa, we need to expose them. We need to expose all these people who perpetrate red tagging not just as a policy, no, but as an instrument to silence dissent at a time when dissent is really needed today. So by exposing these people, we collectively sort of putting a stop to red tagging. And the ultimate goal of this campaign to stop red tagging is to promote human rights. Although we recognize free speech as a fundamental basic right, but there are responsibilities and accountabilities together with this basic right. And part of that is to be very conscious of our the way how we use free speech to promote human rights. Kaya nga, there's no room for red tagging. Let's not be afraid to stop and to call out people who are red taggers. Right now, with technology and all of that, maraming mga pwedeng gawin. No? In fact, we can support campaigns online against red tagging. If we know that a person is is a chronic red tagger, we can especially if that person is a celebrity or someone who is a known personality, let's not be afraid to use our own platforms to call them out and to correct whatever mistakes or whatever incorrect concepts they have about our advocacies. So ayun, so maraming pwedeng gawin. We can be very creative, but towards the end, our goal, we have a common goal, and that is to stop red tagging.
Yeah,
Ang
that's
hirap.
very true. Sorry,
Sige,
go
go ahead.
ahead po.
Ano, ang hirap
I
ang
was
hirap
just
talagang kontrahin yung practice ng red tagging kasi government policy eh. We are up against the whole machinery of government, of the military and all the institutions. Kaya ang tindi ng laban talaga at ang problema dito, yung nare-red tag, marami sa kanila hindi lang hinuhuli, pinapatay. Ano, the military admonishes the public not to have anything to do with activists and dissenters, particularly the left, sabi nila. Huwag kayong makialam dyan, ligtas kayo. Pero ang problema, lahat ng dissenters ay kanilang tinatakanan ng left and terrorists, hoping that with the branding, they isolate critics and activists en masse and win the hearts and minds of the people. But you see, yung nasa ilalim ng rubric ng left ay napakarami yan eh. Progressives, critical thinkers, human rights defenders, anti-imperialists, Democrats, socialists, even communists. The left is a whole wide spectrum of people who advocate societal transformation in its various meanings, levels, and forms. They are not terrorists. Pero nilalamp nila ng gobyerno, ng military, ang lahat ng ito as terrorists. So ngayon, left lahat. So my advice to all victims of red tagging is an old one that harks back to my youth. Struggle, be not afraid. Makibaka, huwag matakot, because the left is on the right side of history.
Yan po. Actually, ano nga eh, that's actually very true, especially for the youth. I remember Elaine talking about, told me a story recently lang doon sa school nila sa Lasal, Cavite, right? Nagulat na lang sila bigla during an anti-drugs campaign yun, di ba? Tapos bigla na lang merong rinedtag na lang bigla yung, aside from different progressive organizations, bigla na lang sinama doon sa listahan yung publication nila, which she is an officer, di ba? Yung Herald Filipino, tama ba?
Yes, I was staff by then ng Heraldo Filipino nung first year ko, and required po kasi umattend do'n sa event na 'yon and nagulat na lang po kami na may side comment sila na, "Yan, yung Heraldo Filipino, maraming nang nakapasok diyan." By by saying nakapasok, they are implying na may nakapasok ng mga, yung mga rebellious groups daw, rebellious individuals, in which, why would they say that? Kasi we are journalists. We are not terrorists. We are not belonging to any group aside from being journalists. So bakit? Bakit po sila nang red tag? Kaya po, that time, di rin po yata sila aware na merong taga Heraldo Filipino or taga student publication namin doon sa event na yun. Kaya po, ang ginawa namin, we wrote an article about the incident. Ayun po ang aking experience.
So,
Yun nga actually very
yung-
troubling no Sir Boni tsaka Lean kasi yun nga yung napapansin namin recently na nag-iikot-ikot sila ngayon sa mga schools. And what's actually yung troubling dito is they equate opposition, they equate criticism, government criticism to terrorism kagad. Which is, as a lawyer myself, meron tayong very specific naman na definition ng terrorism sa batas. Even if of course we protested against the Anti-Terror Act. Pero even that law, even as problematic as that law is, meron din namang specific definitions ang batas on what terrorism is. And wala doon ang just because you criticize the government doesn't mean that you're a terrorist. And in fact, and for our viewers right here, no, para at least maano kayo maklaro rin sa inyo. Ano nga ba yung terrorism, no? According to the Anti-Terrorism Act, a terrorism in the simplest terms is committing acts of violence for purposes of creating fear. Yun lang.
to that, Josh, no, very quickly lang, and I think this is also very important to note, na you're correct when it comes to the definition of terrorism. However, the government, the state, they're using terrorism per se to politicize, or they're politicizing terrorism as a tool and instrument against critics or against dissent. Kasi when you talk about terrorism, like how you defined it, ano siya, pointless niya. If you look at the definition of terrorism, walang kwenta na takot or walang katuturang takot. Yun yung definition ng terrorism. At yun yung gusto ipalabas ng gobyerno. Na itong mga kritiko, yung ginagawa nila ay walang katuturang takot. Yun yung problem, yun yung problematic doon. It falls on that trend na politicizing terrorism against dissent. Na itong mga critics, lahat ng tunggali sa gobyerno, sa pangulo, sa estado, walang katuturan or walang kwenta. And in effect, it normalizes violence. Sa totoo lang, itong ginagawang red tag, it normalizes violence. Unwanted, unwarranted fear, because once you are red tag, sino ba namang hindi matatakot doon? And kung titingnan natin by definition nga yung terrorism, yung ginagawa ng gobyerno, yung ginagawa ng estado, ito yung terrorismo. Kaya nga
Exactly.
we call on them na sila yung mga state terrorists if we really want to go back to the very definition of what terrorism is.
Actually, ironically, if actually going to go back to the original definition of terrorism, nung mga when it first came out, terrorism was originally state-sponsored violence. If you're going to go do a Google search, terrorism was originally that. Pero unfortunately, of course, throughout time, it was switched to the other side naman. So yun nga po. So when we as we conclude our very enlightening episode, what can you say po sa ating mga audience po na na mga sa ating mga baguhang mga aktivista na pwede na ngayon na may fear of being red tagged, or even mga new victims of red tagging ngayon, especially na very strong ngayon ang government propaganda against activists. As a veteran as a veteran activist, Sir Boni, ano po yung pwede nating words of encouragement ba sa ating mga uh, newer younger counterparts?
Nung ako at ang aking mga kahenerasyon ay naging biktima ng witch hunting, which now translates to red tagging, natakot kami, bakit hindi? Pero to a very large extent, dinala namin yon parang badge of courage. Mas lalo kaming naging mapangahas. Contrary to what the government and the military expected, hindi kami natakot because we felt hindi kami nag-iisa. At yun ang ang una kong mensahe, palakasin natin ang ating pagkakaisa. Lahat ng mga aktivista ay dapat lalong magpalakas, lalong dapat mag-organisa sapagkat mas marami tayo eh. Sabi ko nga, yung binabansagan nila ng terrorists, yung naging biktima ng red tagging, napakarami niyan eh, It's one whole spectrum of citizens wanting social change. So kung ipapakita natin ang ating pagkakaisa in that manner, no amount of red tagging will suffice para tayo matalo. Of course, that is easier said than done. Pero I am speaking from experience. Ako ay, well, swerte siguro na inabot ko tong edad na ito, dahil marami sa generasyon ko hindi nakasurvive. At ganon. Of course, yung aking kapatid ay isa ng example ng hindi nakaligtas sa red tagging at sa kampanya ng terrorism ng gobyerno. So magkaisa tayo because for so long as we know deep in our hearts na tama ang ating ipinaglalaban at para sa taong bayan, no amount of false narratives, walang gaano man katinding pagtatatak sa atin na tayo ay terorista, tayo ay kampon ng kadiliman ang makakapangibabaw. At itong ating ginagawa ay isang napakagandang halimbawa para mapalakas natin ang ating pagkakaisa. Let's talk truth to power.
Tama po, Sir Boni. Actually, yung sinabi nyo kanina actually reminded me of Supreme Court decision, no, na sabi doon na government criticism is actually a very important part of community development. So if we cannot discount that, and even the Supreme Court actually recognizes that, na yung development sa ating community can be we can thank our activists for most of the social developments sa any other country, especially here in the Philippines, especially mga labor rights, yung 13th month pay nyo, yung even the voting rights of women were all won yan by movements of our very brave activists. Even our own yung akala natin ngayon na yung akala natin ng basic rights na ngayon na panahon may mga taong namatay para diyan para we can freely exercise all of those things. How about you, Leanne?
Alam mo, Josh, siguro to put into perspective na rin, no, na kasi Boni, he's been in the struggle, he's been in the movement since the 70s, 60s. He's a veteran activist. Alam mo, I think one crucial part in this struggle na I really appreciate about doing activism work, kasi it feels alone fighting for human rights. Laging ganun yung concept, laging ganun yung naisip natin, it feels alone. But in reality, hindi tayo nag-iisa. Marami tayo. This is a collective struggle. This is a collective movement. And you don't necessarily have to be on the far left of the spectrum to exercise your activism. Simply put, if you're fighting for human rights, if you're fighting for press freedom, if you're fighting for decent wage, if you're fighting for security of tenure, yung mga basic fundamental rights that people deserve. People have the right to live quality of life. You can exercise your activism. And all of us, lahat tayo who wanted this kind of life, uh, collectively we can struggle against red tagging, because yung concept ng red tagging is targeted against not just one person, not just one organization, but everyone on that spectrum. Pwede ngang centrist ka, pwede ngang konti nasa right ka. But if you're fighting for human rights, the red tagging per se is targeted against all of us. So it may feel that we're alone fighting for human rights, but in reality, it's not. There's a huge number of people fighting together with us, ready to fight for human rights, ready to fight against red tagging. It's a matter of raising the consciousness. We have to, kailangan natin, tawag dito? Hanapin yung kilite. Remember during this campaign, the 2022 national elections campaign, nobody thought that we can generate this huge number of crowd against Marcos. It's not just simply a vote against Marcos per se. It's a vote against impunity. It's a vote against fascism. It's a vote for human rights. And remember, yun yung core, yun yung very core ng campaign. And we did not expect that number of people. So we need to raise the consciousness of this huge number of people to fight against red tagging. So what can we do? Ano pwede natin gawin? We need to struggle. Sabi nga ni Boni kanina, makibaka, wag matakot. We need to raise that level, yung makibaka, wag matakot, to the millions of people out there na nag-aantay na kailangan natin gisingin na para ituloy itong laban against red tagging.
Maraming salamat, Lea. No? Truly inspiring. No? Elaine?
Yes, truly enlightening ang ating discussion for today. And maraming salamat po once again sa ating mga guests sa pagbabahagi ng inyong sariling karanasan sa red tagging. Naway mas maging daan ang episode na ito upang mas malawakan ang isipan ng ating mga viewers tungkol sa usapin ng red tagging o pag-aakusa ng rebelyon sa mga progresibong individual. Muli, magandang araw at laging tatandaan na huwag matakot dahil hindi terorismo ang pagbibigay ng kritisismo sa isang bansang may sistemang pandemokrasya. Magandang araw po ulit.
Maraming salamat po, Sir Boni at Lea.
Maraming salamat po.
Maraming salamat sa